Sup, y'all? This is a review of The Fate of the Russian Revolution by Richardson. It's titled Penetrating but Unsound. This was published in 1999 in Workers' Liberty Series 1, number 53. I think Al Richardson was one of the leading editors of the journal Revolutionary History, but I'm not sure about that. I welcome the publication of The Fate of the Russian Revolution, Lost Texts of Critical Marxism, Volume 1, a sort of library in itself. It is a handy compendium of the sweep of Max Shachtman's journalism and his co-thinkers. Always penetrating, often witty, and never without interest, Shachtman was a very gifted revolutionary journalist, but he was no theoretician. This puts Shachtman well ahead of James Buchanan, who is neither. But journalism is what it is, and not theory. The book is full of empirical observations about the USSR that are often quite unexceptional in themselves, but it has no explanation of the regime's inner dynamics, nor any enduring projections of its future course of development. Quote, Shachtmanism, end quote, does not answer any of the fundamental questions about the position of this society within the historical development of human institutions. Why, if this was an entirely new form of class society, did it fail to endure? Why did it need to exploit its population by means of the wages system, an essentially capitalist mechanism? Why was it so dynamic, if hugely wasteful, during its period of primitive accumulation, but so stagnant thereafter? Why, to far greater extent than any other known extreme form of dictatorship, did its state have to monopolize the whole structure of society above the basic family unit? Why did it develop as it did and fall as it did? These are actually very important questions. I'm going to repeat them just for my own purposes. Why, if this was an entirely new form of class society, did it fail to endure? Why did it need to exploit its population by means of the wages system, an essentially capitalist mechanism? Why was it so dynamic, if hugely wasteful, during its period of primitive accumulation, but so stagnant thereafter? Why, to far greater extent than any other known extreme form of dictatorship, did its state have to monopolize the whole structure of society above the basic family unit? Why did it develop as it did and fall as it did? My second methodological point is that after 80 years of debate about definitions and labels that ought to be applied to the USSR, I feel that we have run into a dead end, and that the method is no longer of the slightest use to us. None of the definitions, worker state, degenerated worker state, socialism, bureaucratic collectivism, managerialism, etc., had any value at all either for identifying the cause of the system's malaise or for predicting the imminence of its collapse. A far better approach would be to identify its inner workings and to investigate just how the phenomenon developed. If we were not such lazy thinkers, we should have already realized this, since placing nice neat labels and categories upon phenomena might well be the last word when studying inert minerals or biological specimens, but it is a poor guide to the dialectical development of societies which are in constant change. Would you also say this about capitalism? I don't think so. Trotsky, it should be remembered, analyzed the USSR as the USSR developed, changing its definitions accordingly, from Thermidor to Bonapartism, bureaucratic centrism, degenerated worker state, etc. My own preference among all these definitions, and they all contain a certain amount of truth, but because of this fall equally under Occam's razor, is contained in the preface I wrote in Defense of the Russian Revolution and an article in the Lanka Guardian. But basically, I think that the whole method of fighting over which label should be stuck on the ex-USSR is like an abandoned tin mine worked out and exhausted. My third methodological objection is that this label, like many of the others, does not meet the programmatic criteria of Marxism. As a definition, bureaucratic collectivism, like pure, quote, state capitalism, end quote, can lead to three entirely different programmatic conclusions. If it is a higher form of society than capitalism, then we should support it against capitalism. If it is more backwards, we can either oppose it or support it against imperialist colonialism. If it is a historical sideline or dead end, then we do not have to take an overall programmatic stance. Amusingly, at different times in his political career, and for entirely extraneous reasons, Shachtman drew all three conclusions, and he was not above tampering with his own work later to remove the glaring contradictions that this involved. Now, if an analysis can have three opposing conclusions for actions drawn from it, even if it were true, it would not be of the slightest use to us. The fact is, however, that Marxism's programmatic conclusions develop logically from Marxism's analysis and are embodied in Marxism's analysis. Marxism's programmatic conclusions are never tacked on as an afterthought at the end. Marxists never developed theories merely in order to cross out one form of words and substitute another. If an analysis does not lead to different conclusions for action, it is a wasteful, purely academic exercise. The glimmerings of a way out of this impasse might lie in grasping why the left in Britain found it so necessary to expend so much energy for so long, fighting over such labels in the first place, which I believe can only be explained by its marginalization within the working class. Once the Socialist Review Group made, quote, state capitalism, end quote, the Socialist Review Group's fetish, the Socialist Review Group is around Cliff, or badge of identification, and then grew to become the Socialist Workers' Party, the largest organization among professional and student circles. Those who wanted to compete with it on its own ground were obliged to debate in terms of what they in turn thought about the USSR, counterposing their different definitions to it. I can remember the International Marxist Group and the Socialist Labor League / Workers' Revolutionary Party writing pamphlets after pamphlet for 20 years defending their analysis of the USSR as a worker state for no other reason than to compete for student youth. The USSR is now no more, and the states formed in imitation of the USSR are following its pattern of development. As British Stalinism retreats into its last redoubt, academe, the Socialist Workers' Party is now becoming soft on it, too. So why not fight for a hearing elsewhere? The end.